hand traps. Literally every single player in Yu-Gi-Oh! Runs them. Well, every single player that doesn't want to have to go up against a wall that would even make China jealous. Now in regards to hand traps, Master Duel has one very major advantage over playing the actual IRL card game, and that is activation prompts. If you don't know what that means, it basically just means your opponent's board will get some nice little blue LEDs installed whenever they have the chance to activate a card. Now these little activation prompts are much more important than you might think, as if you know when your opponent can activate certain cards, it means you can then make reads on what exactly is in their hand, and therefore play around certain hand traps, or even just bait them out. And that's exactly what this video is going to try to teach. Basically teach you guys how to read your opponent's hand based on these activation prompts so you can play around whatever hand traps they have before they even get to play them. Now, a couple of things to note before we get into it. First of all, I can't cover every single hand trap in the game as that would be ridiculous. So I'm probably only going to cover the top 5 or 6 hand traps, otherwise I'll just be here forever. Second thing to note is that obviously this video is designed to teach people that don't know or are less experienced, maybe newer players. So if you are an experienced player and already know all this stuff, please don't leave some cringy ass comment being like, "Oh my god, this stuff's so obvious, you guys are so dumb, how do you not know this? I was like breastfed to 15, I'm so intelligent." Like, come on guys, you can be a bit more constructive than that. Maybe leave some advice on one of the other hand traps that don't feature in this video and how to play around them. Third thing to note is that obviously this guide isn't going to be some 100% foolproof strategy that will give you 100% certainty confirmation of what's exactly in your opponent's hand. That's not what this guide's meant to be. It's meant to be a guide that gives you some generalized tips on just what to expect from certain activation prompts so you can play around different cards and bait out different cards. That's all it's meant to be. And last but not least, apparently only about 30% of the people that watch my stuff are actually subscribed to the channel. That means 70% of the people watching right now aren't subscribed. So if you do enjoy this kind of content, want to see more content like this, or just find this content useful, please do consider subscribing down below. It's a win-win. You get to know whenever I upload, and I get some more internet points to boost my fragile ego. Alright, so first up on the chopping block is Max C. Now Max C is actually an incredibly easy one to determine whether or not it's in your opponent's hand, and that's because the card can be activated literally whenever. Now that might sound like a downside, but in this case, it's actually a bit of an upside, as it means that whenever you activate a singular card, it will give you a potential read on whether or not your opponent has it, since they'll get an activation prompt for every single card you play. This leaves you with a couple of very easy methods to determine whether or not they actually have Max C in hand. The first one being, just activate a spell card. Literally any spell card that doesn't special summon. If they get an activation prompt, but they don't activate anything, it means they're waiting for you to special summon, and they probably have Max C in hand. This is because most of the popular hand traps in the game, such as Imperm or Effect Veiler, require you to actually have a monster on board first for them to target. So if you don't summon any monsters and the first thing you do is activate a spell card, you know the activation prompt can't be Effect Veiler and it can't be Imperm. This leaves basically only Ash Blossom and Max C. So if they don't respond to your spell card with an Ash Blossom, it means they just have Max C in hand. The other method to determine if your opponent has Max C in hand is based on the fact that this community is very dumb and very illiterate. Basically, if you activate a monster effect that searches, a monster effect that target destroys, basically any monster effect at all that isn't a special summon, and your opponent gets a prompt, if they don't activate anything in response, it probably means they're waiting for you to special summon and they have Max C in hand. This is because if your opponent had an Imperm, if they had an Effect Veiler, if they had an Ash Blossom, they would have just used that effect instantly. This community is very dumb, they don't read. So if you activate an effect and they get a prompt, they're just going to click yes. So the only time they're not clicking yes is if they have Max C in hand and they're waiting. So a good rule of thumb is, if your opponent gets a prompt but they don't respond with anything, it's Max C. Now Ash Blossom is a bit of a harder one, because unfortunately, like I said, this community is extremely dumb. So if your opponent actually gets a prompt to activate Ash Blossom, chances are 85 to 90% of the time, they're just going to be activating it. So there's never really a chance to make a read on it. On the flip side though, this does mean it's exceptionally easy to actually bait out Ash Blossoms, because your opponent's going to activate them whenever you activate any single draw effect at all. Anything. whether it be just a simple draw one effect that just happens to be attached to a card that doesn't really mean a whole lot, whether it be a Pot of Desires, a Pot of Greed, basically any single draw effect, a danger card that's not even a once per turn, so Ash Blossom it does nothing, but they still Ash Blossom it, they Ash Blossom any draw effect. So if you have a draw effect in hand and you're scared of Ash Blossom, just use that first. That way, if you have an important searching effect, or if you have an important Destiny Hero card that you want to summon from the extra deck using a certain Destiny Hero fusion spell, it's going to be completely safe from the Ash Blossom. The process of identifying if your opponent has an effect failure or if your opponent has an imperm in hand is the exact same process, and similar to Max C, it's just process of elimination. At the very start of your turn, just use a spell card. If your opponent doesn't get any prompts, it probably means any hand traps they have require you to have a monster on board first, and therefore, just special summon any monster at all. You don't have to use the effect of that monster, you just have to get an effect monster onto the board. You can even normal summon an effect monster. You don't have to use the effect, you just have to get one on board or just summon one to the board. Because as soon as you do the summon, if your opponent gets a prompt, it means they required the monster on board for their hand trap, so they have effect failures or they have imperms in hand. Now obviously, whatever you summon to test for these hand traps is put in the firing range of these hand traps. So very important to note, if you're going to test for hand traps, make sure you're testing them with your shittier cards first. Special summon out some trashy ass monster, whatever. Don't normal summon your very important combo starter that's needed for your entire deck to function as the first thing you do to test for a hand trap, because it's just going to get it negated. Summon out your trashier monsters first. If you find out there is a prompt and you think they might have one, link summon into something shitty, I don't know, try to summon a Verte, summon something that's going to bait out these hand traps pretty easily. Then you can just do your normal summon and continue as if nothing happened. Turn on your TV, load up the latest episode of Sesame Street, learn to count to 5, and you're good to go. In all seriousness though, Nibiru is a very self-explanatory card. Just make sure when you're playing the game, if your opponent has absolutely no activation prompts, still keep tabs on exactly how many monsters you summon, because as soon as you summon that 5th monster, if your opponent gets an activation prompt, they're going to have Nibiru in hand. So if you don't want to get Nibiru'd, try to summon only 4 monsters. If you can't get around that, well then, at least you'll know they have the Nibiru as soon as you summon the 5th, so don't really try to play any further or waste any more resources that you know are just going to get completely Nibiru'd. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's little guide video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. If you did, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel down below. That way when I make more guide videos in the future, you guys will be the first to be able to watch them. Also, speaking of which, if you actually have any ideas for future guide videos, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, as my little pea brain has kind of run out of ideas, so any video ideas is much appreciated. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Laters.
Hey, big brother, can I watch SpongeBob?
Shut up, Mokuba. I'm busy flagging YouTube videos to compensate for the fact that I have an extremely small penis.
Oh.